We continue discussing about essay questions. First, let us talk about how do we construct essay questions. Let us start with the basic. A typical essay questions comprises two parts: the directive verbs and also the object of the verbs. This forms the simplest form of essay question. Let us look at the example. Justify the view you prefer. Justify is a directive verb. It gives us an idea, the thinking order as expected from this essay question. Based on the Bloom's taxonomy, justify is C5. It involves decisions and also reasonings behind the decisions. And then the second part is the object of the verbs. What do you want the students to justify? Based on the instruction here, the students will have to justify their views based on their preference. Now let us look at the second example. Defend the theory as the most suitable for the situation. Defend is a directive verb, and the object of the verb it will be the theory. As the most suitable for this situation, it will be the conditions. Based on the directive verbs, we know that it is likely also C5, as it involves reasonings, which is equivalent to justified. The only difference between defense and justified is that when you are asked to give justifications, normally the students are asked to make decisions or choice. But when come to the defense here, as implied by the sentence here, the decision has already been made. The students will have to come up with the reasoning, whether the students agree or not agree with the decisions, which in this case, the theory has already been pre-selected as the most suitable for the situations. Now the question is asking the students to defend that. What you see here, the most basic form of essay questions constitute two main parts: directive verbs and also the object of the verbs. You have to make sure the instructions is made clear to the students so that they know what is being expected out of the question. Now let us proceed on how can you make a essay questions to be more focused. This can be the process that you develop an essay question. Normally we start with the simplest form with directive verbs and also object of the verbs. For example, the first versions that you construct the essay questions, it will be evaluate the impacts of the industrial revolutions on England. This is the simplest form. And this kind of question is usually seen in structured question. Not much elaborations, and normally it is quite straightforward. But when come to the essay question, you know that normally you would like to assess towards higher order thinking. When come to the higher order thinking, there are two main elements. First, you will have to make the case or situations to be quite refined, unique, not in the general form, which is supposed to be specific, as this can encourage the analysis of the situations. When you have the analysis as a part of the solution, then you can secure at least C4 of the cognitive levels. Second part, you want some decisions or personal inputs from the students. You want to encourage critical thinkings. Therefore, you must provide some rooms for the students to make decisions, provide justifications, demonstrate critical thinkings, creativity, and innovations. And you want the solutions given by the students custom-made specifically towards the conditions that you are referring to. Instead of being too general, normally we will make it to be more specific, more towards case-to-case basis, so that the reasonings and justifications of the students can stand out. On that basis, normally we will go through a process making the basic essay question into something which is more focused and more specific. How do you do that? Normally we will add in some conditions, make it more focused and more narrow, so that it is not too general. You want to observe the students can apply some concept and principles which they learn in the more general manner and apply them to the case as specified in the questions, in order to demonstrate their ability to apply those principles and concepts. So what will you do? You can start with setting the specific groups or narrowing down what seems to be general. You may transform this into evaluate the impacts of industrial revolutions on the family in England. The main difference between the first version and the second version. This is more general. It discrete to a country, but now it has been narrowed down to the family in England. You may also further refine it from the family here. Evaluate the impacts of industrial revolutions on the role of father in poor communities of England. Now this gives you a narrower perspective. It narrowed down further to fathers and also in poor communities. You may add in more informations, such as evaluate the impacts of industrial revolutions on the role of father in poor community of England, based on whether or not the industrial revolutions improve fathers' abilities to provide material necessity of life and educations and training for their children. Now the topic of discussions, it will be more focused. It is about providing material necessity of life and educations and trainings for the children by the fathers in poor communities. What you see here, the questions now becomes deeper and deeper, and then you may further expand the question. Evaluate the impacts of industrial revolutions on the role of fathers in poor communities of England, based on whether or not the industrial revolutions improve fathers' abilities to provide material necessity of life and educations and training for their children. This part is the same as the previous one. On top of that, there are some additional parts of it. Explain how the role of a father as provider changed the industrial revolutions and whether or not the change were an improvement for fathers striving to provide for their children. In this case, not only answering for the first part, the second part have already been expanded into another new perspectives. And this is a typical essay questions, trying to stimulate the critical thinkings of the students. The students may have learned the principles and concepts in a general form within the course or by referring to the lecture notes or the references. Normally those are in the general manner. However, when come to the essay question, when the conditions and situations have been quite refined, this will test the ability of the students to relate the relevant theories and principles with these situations. The students cannot simply apply those concepts and principles blindly without properly understanding the situations. Some principles may be applicable, some principles may not. This is about the application part. There will also be analysis part. When the case and the situations are refined enough, the students will have to know what are the problems within the case, any special conditions that students need to pay attention. And then based on the instruction, students are asked to evaluate the impacts. First, students will need to know the impact and then evaluate the levels of impacts. And the evaluations process will have to be supported with strong reasonings. This constitutes C5. And then the entire discussions will need to be specifically referring to the case as stipulated in the essay question. This stimulates the critical thinkings. At the end of the day, you will see the answers provided by the students, unique from the others. It depends how the students go through the reasonings. The students will have to construct essay in order to answer the question. Next, let us talk about two typical ways to construct essay question. It can be in the form of questions. It can also be in the form of imperative statement. These are the examples. How are the process of increasing productions and improving quality in a manufacturing plant similar or different based on cost? This is a typical mode of question. This kind of questions is advantageous in making the essays to be open-ended. However, there are limitations as there is no instructions given to the students. Without instructions given to the students, there won't be any directive verbs. You know the advantage of the directive verb. It will imply to the students to which levels of thinking order is expected. Now, if you set the questions in the mode of a question statement, this cannot be implied to the students. There is a risk that students misinterpret the question, not knowing that the students will have to answer up to certain levels of thinking orders. It is understandable that many lecturers do not encourage the essay questions to be set in the mode of the question, because we would like to prevent the confusions and ambiguity. We would like the students to also know what is the cognitive level of the question, so that they can answer accordingly. Personally, I agree with that. If possible, I will construct the essay questions in the mode of imperative statement, where the directive verbs will have some ideas to the students, the expectations out of the question. However, this doesn't restrict you from constructing your essay questions in the mode of the question. Only that you need to always remind the students, when come to the essay questions, the students will have to go towards the higher thinking orders as possible. Essay questions is where the students will have to demonstrate their in-depth understanding, critical thinking, and higher thinking orders, even though it is not being implied in the essay question. Now let us talk about the imperative statement. Compare and contrast the processes of increasing productions and improving quality in a manufacturing plant based on cost. The two questions are similar. They are talking about similar scopes, but now the instructions is clearer. It is asking the students to compare and contrast. And based on the directive verbs, we know that there will be elements of analysis. As a solutions to the questions, the discussions will have to focus on the analysis.